Hello, everybody. I'm joined again today by Glenn Diesen, my colleague and friend in Norway. I'm sure you all know all him. He's running a wonderful YouTube channel as well, and he is a professor at the University of Southeast Norway. Glenn, welcome back.
Oh, thank you for inviting me back.
Uh, I wish it would be for better circumstances, but at the moment, a lot of things are going really, really bad. We first need to talk about our colleague Jacques Baud, who since yesterday, today we're speaking on December 16th, yesterday, December 15th, he just was sanctioned by the European Union. Jacques Baud, of course, is a Swiss colonel, a former Swiss colonel, now retired, living in a European country. And he's been on your podcast, he's been on my podcast, and he is giving brilliant analysis on especially Ukraine and Russia. He wrote books about Ukraine and Russia and the Ukraine war, the origins of it. And now the European Union is accusing him of spreading Russian propaganda and put him on the sanctions list. Could you believe it when you heard that?
Well, it did take me by surprise. Well, mostly because they went after someone of his stature, which was interesting. But it is a direction which the EU has been going. That is, you've spoken as well about the decision to sanction German citizens who's been reporting abroad, who can't come back home, who have their bank accounts frozen. So we kind of been, it's not the end of the story. That's well, whenever you see these horrible things happening now, you have to see it in the context of where we're going. But I guess, well, what makes this so extra horrific, though, is not just that he's a colonel from Swiss intelligence, but the main thing, the main topic I always discuss with him is his concern for how the EU is pursuing policies which undermines its own economic and security interests. And part of the reason is the EU locked itself into narratives. It doesn't accept any dissent. So even if you have facts which can be verified, then it's not allowed to enter the discourse if it undermines the narrative. And he, as an intelligence a colonel in Swiss intelligence, he's very concerned because if you're not able to identify the main issues, the main problems, then you can't resolve it and you can't act in your own interest. So this is the main approach. And this they said, well, this is Russian propaganda, and this is like a word now you can just throw out. It doesn't have to be proven. They use these little catchphrases like Kremlin talking points, as if your argument sounds a lot like what the Russians might say. Hence, you're a propagandist. I mean, because the EU is always right, the Russians are always wrong, and if you contest this, well, that's because you stand on the side of the Russians. So this is not good times in Europe.
No, not at all. And you're right about the context. And I must also add here, and that he's not the first Swiss who was included in the EU sanction list. Before him, in June this year, Nathalie Yamb was added to the sanctions list. She's a Swiss Cameroonian binational, but she's been living in Switzerland, and she's Swiss. I mean, born in Switzerland and has Swiss passport and everything. And shame on me, the news didn't travel all the way to me. I didn't see that. I didn't actually realize that. But already in June, she was put on the sanctions list, and she told me just a moment ago when I finally reached out to her, that this had very severe impacts on her. Although Switzerland is not in the European Union, the Swiss banks still froze her bank accounts, and she cannot fly over the European Union. So I'm not going to tell you where she is right now, but it means like being abroad, you cannot go back to Switzerland. Being in Switzerland means you cannot go abroad because you're locked in. Switzerland is completely surrounded by the European Union. So this is very, very severe and draconic. And we're talking here about just accusations, right? Nothing proven in a court of law. I mean, Glenn, what does this tell us about the state of the European Union is in? It's not even I mean, this is a punishment not given out by the judicial branch. This is the executive branch that hands out punishments on private citizens of our countries.
No, well, this is no democratic control. There's no scrutiny. This is, as you said, this is the unelected EU Council, European Council, just pushing out this these decisions. And of course, if you go to the EU's own website, then you see also how it's framed. That is, the name of the document is it's as a decision concerning restrictive measures in view of Russia's destabilizing activities. So you argue then that Russia's destabilizing Europe, which means, well, how would you operationalize this? What exactly would this translate into specific activities? And then it finds that whoever might make points or arguments which could be seen as supporting or legitimizing Russia, they are destabilizing because they are threatening the EU. And also, if you criticize the EU leadership or their decisions, well, you're kind of also then destabilizing, because if people might lose trust in the EU leadership. So any dissent now can be seen as destabilizing, because stability in their view is that we all agree that this is our conflicts with the Russians is a black and white story. It's a fight of good versus evil, the forces of light versus darkness. And if you are now taking the side of darkness by trying to defend them, which means explain what Russia is doing, then you can be seen as a destabilizing force, and they will come for you as well. I mean, of all people, to go after Colonel Jacques Baud, this is really, yeah. It can't be explained in a sensible way. They have to talk in cliches and slogans and this kind of ambiguous ideas of destabilizing Europe by questioning its leadership. I mean, this is where we are now.
But also Nathalie Yamb. I mean, she is an she's an anti-colonialist. I mean, she's trying to cry out about all of the hurt that is still caused, especially by France on the still like the neo-colonial behaviors of France. And I mean, this kind of rhetoric is exactly what we said is our human rights for and the freedom of expression and so on, right? So that citizens can criticize their states and the environment that they live in, so that we can have a healthy democracy, right? And I thought, at least, even if the European Union is imperfect and our Western democracies are imperfect, I thought at least the separation of power is working. But again, this is a punishment from an executive branch on individuals that have been not found guilty in any court of law. How is it possible that the executive right now in the EU is able to amass all of these powers? And maybe we can also put it into the context of the frozen Russian assets, that, this is, I mean, they're jumping over like so many legal requirements that you would think are there in place in order to make sure that you don't have an overstepping of an overreach of power. And they are now able to, the executive is able to breach all of that.
I was just going to compare this to the stealing of the Russian assets, because in the EU, of course, they had this voting every 6 months to vote whether or not to extend the sanctions, and they have to be all in agreement. But now, of course, that they see that they're losing the argument, the war might come to an end. They have then the pressure that some of the member states don't necessarily want to vote to renew the sanctions, and also many member states are a bit frightened that the EU will essentially now break all rules, essentially taking the Russian assets, something that's never been done before. So it is quite extreme. And so what does the EU do? Because when it meets opposition, what does the European Union do? Well, it just plows through. So now, of course, they suspended this. There will be no more voting. They just changed it. Now the assets are permanently frozen. In order to release these assets, you have to now have all members agree to not to release it. So even countries like Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, which are very Russophobic to the core, they would never release anything. So unless they're under great pressure. But so this is, and how was this done? How is this legal within the European Union? Well, it's not. But the rules, they don't mean anything anymore. It's just nonsense. And I just want to add one thing more on Jacques Baud, because again, I have the document here of the EU Council when it says that, yeah, he's a former Swiss army colonel and strategic analyst, blah blah. He's a guest on pro-Russian programs, television and radio programs. Pro-Russian, so it's not even Russian. They're seen as pro-Russian. What exactly is pro-Russian? If you're an academic, you want to unpack this. Does that mean that you think that it's important to have good relations with Russia, which is the largest country in Europe? Do you have to hate the Russians? I mean, does it mean that you support the Russians against the West? I mean, it can mean everything and nothing. So they just throw these terms out, pro-Russian. He acts as a mouthpiece. I mean, and then the evidence they use is he's responsible for supporting these conspiracy theories. And the one example they give out here is, for example, accusing Ukraine of orchestrating its own invasion to join NATO. Now, what Colonel Baud actually has said, he's quoted Arestovich, which is he was the advisor of Zelensky, quite a prolific figure as well within Zelensky's administration. And he gave this interview back in 2019, where he essentially predicted when the Russian invasion would come, exactly what the Russians would take, what they would do. And he argued that this is something that has to be done, because a major war with Russia is the ticket into NATO. And he essentially argued, our threat to join NATO will eventually trigger a Russian invasion, and then the NATO will come in and assist us and will defeat the Russians. So this is, and this will be our ticket to NATO, a big war with Russia. And it will be very cool, is what he said. I mean, so he quotes Arestovich. Now, if this is the top advisor of Zelensky, how is this a conspiracy theory? I mean, then at least say that Kiev is spreading propaganda about itself and conspiracy theories about itself, and then he's just quoting it. But now he's sanctioned. It's not that they disagree with him; they come with a counter argument. They sanctioned him. This is very dark. This is very Soviet.
That's the whole point. They don't have to prove anything, right? They don't. And these are like, this is a little passage, right? This is a paragraph. And a paragraph is now, together with his name and nationality and date of birth, is in this database. And whoever's in that database does not get any more services from any EU-linked organization, right? Otherwise, they get punished. So, and they don't need to do anything else but put their names and their little extract in there, and they don't need to prove anything. In a court of law, this cannot stand, because all of these are accusations, wildest accusations, and that are not even illegal. It is not illegal to be pro-Russian. There is no law in the European Union that would forbid you from no, I don't think there's a law that forbids you from saying something like that. There's a law that says you cannot use RT, you cannot use Sputnik. But in theory, we live in free societies, right? Where even if he was pro-Russian, which he isn't, he analyzes the situation, and he portrays the origins of where this is coming from with a certain framework. But we all do that, and that. I am just shocked that all of this is now. It used to be journalists, right, that reported from the front lines. Nathalie Yamb, I didn't know about. She's being accused of having flown there and so on, which is also outrageous. I mean, that then she gets included in this, and now it's Colonel Baud who's doing analysis, and. They don't have.
But this was his job.
It was his job.
He's an analyst for Swiss intelligence. When you do analysis, you gather information. You do an objective analysis, and to do this, you also have to recognize this. For example, the security concerns of the opponents, and this is the problem. We already know from the beginning of this war, the EU is very obsessed about narratives, that it has to fuel some narratives. For example, you and I have spoken before about this need to push this idea that it was an unprovoked invasion. This is very core, because once you accept that it was unprovoked, that it's just opportunism, then you can't do any compromise. You can't, because then it's appeasement. You're just rewarding expansionism. And so it has to be defeated with military force. So as the former EU foreign policy chief said, this will be resolved on the battlefield. Of course, this was when the EU was more optimistic about defeating Russia, but this was at the core of the narrative. So any and it's very easy to disprove this, because you have 30 years of top officials across the West talking about how NATO expansion was considered to be an existential threat by Russia. They all recognized that Ukraine was the brightest of all red lines, and but of course, you can't undermine the narrative. So now anyone who brings up facts, then that disturbs the narrative, then it can be seen as destabilizing. And no, it's and the weird thing about Colonel Baud is that he's in his books and all, he almost only cites Western sources. He doesn't. The reason why the EU had to accuse him of being on pro-Russian television show is because he doesn't go on Russian programs, because he doesn't want to be used by Russian propaganda for his arguments. So this guy, he has all the objective analysis. He substantiates everything using Western sources. He doesn't want to appear too much on foreign media, so his analysis won't be used for propaganda purposes. He does everything right, and he's sanctioned. I mean, if they can take him, they can take anyone now. And this is,
That's the message. That's the message. It's very clearly. So this message is, I mean, it's a huge punishment on him, and it's probably going to upend the life how he's been living it so far. It's going to impose drastic changes on him personally. And it's a message to even you and I, right? A Norwegian in Norway, a Swiss in Japan. It's like any one of us can now at any point in time land on that list, and that's the message. It's like punish one, educate hundreds, right? It's very, very draconian, very Orwellian. I still don't quite understand how it is possible that went through. It seems that the French were the ones who requested this, and in the end, it just means that you have the European Council that voted on this and said yes to this. So this is a decision by the European body, and it has to be. I'm not sure if it's majority vote or unanimously, but it's voted through by the institution. And there was one more point I wanted to make, and now I forgot about it. But maybe I'll leave it at that. It's just the chilling effect that this is supposed to have is, of course, tremendous.
Yeah, they also put on this list another colleague, a Ukrainian journalist, Diana Panchenko. I've been on the program a bit. Well, she used to be on YouTube. She had more than 2 million followers, but she was cut off YouTube, and now she's put on the EU sanctions list. Now, they define her as Ukrainian-born, so not Ukrainian, but Ukrainian-born journalist and propagandist. That's how they define her. Diana Panchenko is a Ukrainian-born journalist and propagandist, and she produces and diffuses anti-Ukrainian, pro-Russian narratives. Now, what makes them anti-Ukrainian? Well, a lot of the things she's reporting a lot about is this brutal mobilization of Ukrainian men, which are being pulled out of their apartments and off the streets to fight in a war which can no longer even be won. So, but they have to get into the EU mindset here, because this is a war which has to be won. They have to defeat Russia. They have to weaken Russia. So if you're now criticizing how Ukrainian men are brutalized and dragged into the army and how they're treated, then you're also anti-Ukrainian, because you're undermining the war efforts. So anything that doesn't support the war is anti-Ukrainian. And it's just there's no, in the past you would have debated her like, okay, what is your argument? Because they also said, oh, she accused of being Nazi elements in the leadership in Kiev. Well, there are Nazi elements. all Western media recognized this before the Russians invaded. After the Maidan coup in 2014, BBC had documentaries, they had articles all about how heavy presence the war of these Nazi elements and what kind of leading position many of them ended up in. But now, of course, it's pro-Russian propaganda. Why? Well, because it supports the Russian narrative, that it questions the legitimacy of the leadership in Ukraine, and it might legitimize the Russian military actions, which means it's Russian propaganda. So it's not whether or not it's true, it's just whether or not it supports our narrative. And it legitimizes us, or does it legitimize the Russians? So this is it. This is what propaganda means now. This is what destabilization means. And this is the reasoning for actually sanctioning people now.
Yes, it is.
Individuals.
It's okay. It's very unsettling because I thought our institutions work better. On the other hand, you know how they say, first they ignore you, then they fight you, and then you win. So it seems that we are now in stage number 2, right? Where people who have actual real arguments and who do put it together and who are able to challenge the narrative are not being ignored anymore. They're actively being fought against with like very, very heavy weaponry. And actually, I know this from a couple of observations with a couple of bureaucrats. The really malevolent ones, when they disagree with you, what they do is they don't try to slap you on the fingers. They try to knock you dead. This is something psychological in these people, that they try to stifle dissent in the as much as possible, and always use the biggest possible weapon, not the smallest one. It's not an escalation. They try to come down very hard. But isn't it also just a reaction now to the fact that this war is lost, and that the scale of the EU-NATO defeat is just getting so overwhelming that they're not able to control the narrative anymore. If you win a war, you write the history books, right? And they cannot do that, but they are now fighting this losing of the discursive space.
Yeah, no, I think that's a key issue, though. That is the assumption that they will be able to write the history thereafter. It's all the things they've been pushing for the past 4 years has proven to be false. And again, this whole idea that whoever said, well, perhaps let's not expand NATO. This is not going to be pro-Ukrainian. This is going to destroy Ukraine. They were all dismissed. This is an anti-Ukrainian argument, we're told. If you're for Ukraine, if you're for Europe, then you just ignore all this and plow on. And all of this will be proven now to be in fake. All these decisions were horrible decisions for Ukraine, for Europe, and all these leaders, have to be held accountable. But they're going to be able. They thought they would be able to write the history thereafter. History will not be kind to them. They contributed to the destruction of Ukraine. They made the EU less secure, less prosperous, and less relevant in the world. So no, there's this panic now, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and before we started talking, you said the panic probably also has something to do with the new national security strategy the US just put out. And we now have Mr. Merz, who apparently yesterday said openly that Europe and the United States are not standing together anymore, and the Europeans being in shock again that their entire world is crumbling around them, including the US EU. US-European transatlantic alliance, right? Although we do need to discuss the argument by Brian Beletic, but maybe let's do that later. Let's focus on just the shock that the Europeans seem to be in, at least at the moment.
Well, but it's also important why this is a massive shock for the EU, because what is Europe? We keep talking about Europe as if it's one cohesive entity, and this is not a common. This has never happened before in our history, and it has a lot of conditions behind it. What makes all these 27 member states not turn on each other, not necessarily fight each other, but at least pursue a different economic and security interest, because they do have different interests. And one of the reasons why they've been organized for so long under the same umbrella is, of course, the United States, which has been the main pacifier, taking essential leadership over Europe. This has been important. Well, this is also going away now. You also have the with a multipolar world, it's the more the economic interest will not be the main, won't necessarily be with other European states. It will be with other parts of the world. When economic interest shifts, political loyalties may go as well. So there's a lot of indications now that the solidarity won't be able to persist. And the main economic purpose of the EU was unity by having this economic collective bargaining power. Well, the EU is not delivering any economic benefits anymore because we cut ourselves off from important centers of power, notably Russia and China. And also we put all our eggs in the American basket while they are deprioritizing Europe. So there is panic. When this war ends, Europe might begin to fragment fast as well. So there's a lot of obsession now with this in-group loyalty. How do you keep the group together? And Carl Schmitt, this a scholar from within Hitler's party, he came up with all these ideas of the concept of the enemy within. This is something that strengthens political unity. That is, you purge those who do not display sufficient loyalty towards the in-group and conform to the group. And so it's always good to go for hunt for enemies within, because it's as you said, it's not just going after Colonel Baud, for example. It's you send a clear signal to the rest that anyone who questions the authorities could be seen as not just the enemy of the authorities, but an enemy of the group. You're a traitor. And and I think after all these years now, I mean, it's not just the Ukraine war. We did this all the way for the past decade. Remember the Russiagate hoax? Everyone had to subscribe to all these ridiculous ideas that, Trump might be an agent of the Russians, all these things. And we kept looking for traitors within our own ranks, the enemy within. Then you had COVID, who's not going to follow, who's going to kill your grandma effectively by not doing as they're told. And then, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So you have all this continuous, never-ending search for enemies within. So, and now, of course, that Europe risk fragmenting, this is going to be put on steroids. Anyone who doesn't conform could be an enemy within. And that means your loyalties are with the opposing side, with the enemy. And that's what they refer to as pro-Russian. It's that you don't hate them enough, that you don't condemn them, you don't fall in line with the narrative. Because if you're pro-us, you would repeat the talking points which you have been given.
I think this is completely on point, but I wonder if the people who are driving this are actually smarter than we think. I mean, at this point, it's a trope to call Kallas and von der Leyen and so on simpletons. But on the one hand, yes, it's all against the enemy and making this artificial enemy in the East and projecting yourself into that, including the worst of yourself, and how the Germans are projecting their own Nazi past into people in West Asia, right, into the Palestinians, and then bears basically say like, no, we're standing with you in order to defend yourself from the modern Nazis, like projecting yourself. But on the other hand, we've seen how the European Union as an institution has been successful in using this crisis to grab power over flight rights, right, which are not EU. I mean, the EU had no competences. Von der Leyen announced it, and now it's basically a fact. The frozen assets, and on the Duran, Alexander Mercury's and Alex Christoforou, they keep saying like this will necessarily lead to taxation. We will see EU taxation directly from the center, which means a finance minister or something, which is, kind of the United States of Europe through the anti-democratic backdoor. So that you don't need consensus anymore. So on the one hand, yes, we see the fracturing. On the other hand, we see how the center is actually successfully using this to unify and grab the power. And for some reason, which I don't understand, the member states or the people who oppose it, including Orban and others, are not able to stop it. I mean, Orban is clearly against this, and Hungary is a member state, and they can't stop it. They are, for some bureaucratic reasons, unable to put a brake on it.
No, I agree, and again, this is also a bit of a big puzzle. That is why a lot of these countries which are pushing the hardest against the European Union, when it's time to vote, for example, on sanctions and other things, they do fall in line.
Yeah.
So it
Why?
is interesting. I don't know, and I think this is what maybe the role the United States sees for themselves, that it's very hard for individual member states to stick their heads out because it could be chopped off. But I think for the United States, when they in this new national security strategy, it's I forgot the word they used. It was they want to not incentivize, but support or something political groups which want to pose this direction, because they argue, they say that the new security strategy is anti-European, but it argues the Europeans are heading for civilizational erasure. That is, you're having demographic declines, not reproducing the culture, the economy, relative share of global GDP has been plummeting. You have the leaders becoming increasingly undemocratic, authoritarian, and they make the point that in 20 years you're not going to recognize Europe anymore. And and again, this was kind of, well, if you remember the speech at the Munich Security Conference by J.D. Vance, this was the opener, but for many European leaders, they were so offended that how dare they? Because he came and he said, your main enemies are not external, some Chinese or Russian. The enemy comes here. It's this creeping authoritarianism, and but this security strategy put it actually into strategy, these kind of sentiments. And again, I can understand why they're offended, because these European leaders, for anyone who studied the EU, you go through the academic literature, they thought they were recreating a better world, pivoting away from the anarchic world of the past, creating this new good world, which is why the EU is
Peace
always conceptualized
projects,
in
United States of Europe, happy
normative
together.
power Europe, civilian power Europe. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you had to study and teach in university. So this was the role. They had essentially broken with the politics of the past, and now they were going to recreate the world in their own image. So they had a very flattering vision of themselves and Europe's role in the world, being a key power which would be a force for good. So of course it's not nice to see what has happened to you. But I don't know. I like John Hertz a lot. This is a scholar who wrote in 1950 about ideological fundamentalism, and how often the great idealism has profound consequences. Because if you think that you can bridge the flawed world of today with essentially utopia of tomorrow, if you're fighting for these great ends, you're willing to do anything to achieve it, to break any rule, and you have no recognition of the basic security competition, because you're just fighting for goodness, and whoever opposes you well, de facto they are fighting for the opposite, which is evil. So no, they often turn into radicals, where every conflict has to be resolved through defeat of the opponents. So
Yeah, and this is
that's a good description of the EU now.
it is a good description of the EU. It's a point that a guest on my show recently, Professor Hans-Georg Möller, German professor at the University of Macau, actually made the distinction between moral leaders and moralistic leaders. When you start using virtue and value, and preach it and say like everything needs to be like this, right? Then you set yourself up for just very, very heavy-handed, horrible policies that you're going to be pushing through, versus moral values that would guide you in pluralistic decision making. It was different. He explained it very well, as opposed to me. But one
There's a
thing that I
nice.
still, yeah,
Sorry.
no, please.
No, I was going to say there's a concept that, there's the good hatred. That is, if you portray your opponents as pure evil, then your hatred is a sign of virtue. So
Oh
I
yeah.
see a lot of this now being pushed by the EU as well. And well, even in this country, I saw the newspaper this morning, the largest paper in the country. They were reporting on these killings in at Bondi Beach in Sydney, and they said. Well, we're going to have to figure out who's behind this. And they make the point on the last 3 months, we see that Islamists, the right-wing extremists, and Russian intelligence is involved on attacks on Jews. It's like, are they now? The Russian intelligence is out killing Jews. I mean, all they're doing is is just this is the indoctrination. Just make sure that you repeat the same thing over and over again. That your opponent is pure evil, and so your hatred of them is good. I mean, there's no need to justify any of this, because if you justify it, because no one's going to push back. Who's going to say, well, that does make sense. Why would Russian intelligence agencies go around killing Jews? How do you make sense of this? And that's, well, now you're defending Russia. You're being pro-Russian, aren't you? So, welcome to the sanctions list. This is the this is how this insanity is allowed to persist. And in their minds, they think this is pro-Western because it's anti-Russian. But all you do is if you're not able to manage this security dilemma or security competition with the Russians, in no way will this be good for us. This is always my point. What they call pro-Russian is pro-Western. This is, you don't want this war with the Russians. I always also make the point. Why do we even have this new Cold War with Russia? They're not a communist empire seeking to conquer Europe. Their security concerns are not unreasonable. They don't want a hostile military bloc expanding on their borders. If we made peace, accommodate their security concerns, we could have better economic prosperity. We could have better security. We wouldn't have this political polarization. We might be able to preserve media freedom, freedom of speech, and avoid all this crushing authoritarianism. So it's not about being pro-Russian. It's about doing what's in our interest. And that's, again, going back to Colonel Baud, this is where he comes in. That's his point of view. But sorry, I got off point there, but it's once you can't have any reasonable discussions anymore, there's no course correction, then these lunatics will just continue with the pedal to the metal, sorry.
Pedal to pedal to the metal. But I always thought, these values of the West, especially like freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and so on, were meant especially to protect us in times of crises. But turns out that as soon as crisis strikes, it's immediately out. It's immediately gone. It's like it's really. I mean, the rate of deterioration in the last 10 years has just been mind blowing. How the West like immediately undid all of their basic concepts. And here I must actually say the Americans have been better than the Europeans. They do have debates about freedom of speech. They do protect it, not completely, but you can see how the discussion went from the Democrats to the Republicans. And yes, there's hypocrisy on both sides, but they didn't eradicate this. To my knowledge, the United States hasn't put any. Has the United States put people on their sanction list the way the EU now does, including their own citizens, for over Russia? I'm not sure. I can't recall any instance. So in a sense, the EU is deteriorating even faster than what we've been criticizing so long, that are also like processes inside the US that are even going against their constitution.
Yeah, well, I always make this point when I talk to American academics as well, that at least in the United States, they have this strong tradition of freedom of speech, which is being protected. All these democratic free speech values. We always say these are Western values, but for many countries in Europe, they're not traditional. We don't have the same experiences. So I always make the point, if they can't keep on holding on to it, then there's no hope for Europeans. And I think that's quite evident now. There's no. Like, let's say tomorrow they went out with this sanctions list, quite a few names on them. Let's say tomorrow they have a new list where they come up with 100 new names. what would stop it? Who would oppose it? What kind of debate would it start? Nothing. There's no restrictions anymore. There are no restraints, and the EU consists of like a bunch of laws and agreements. But the EU leadership now just throws it all away and say, well, we're going to overrule it. We have emergency laws, all this nonsense. So no, it's. I don't think they know, well, maybe they do know, but how much they're actually destroying. You're not going to be able to get this back, this trust, the rule of law, the freedom of speech, all the things they're like plowing over at the moment. So,
No,
no, it's
the only chance EU citizens now have is to actually wrestle it back from these kleptocrats. I mean, hopefully through a process of elections, right, and throwing them out of office. But we see in Romania how elections are being rigged. We're seeing it. We're seeing it all across the board. We're now seeing how the EU is like heavily invested into propping up the political opponents of Viktor Orban, right? So. I think it's not a done deal yet. I still think that the instrument of election still has maybe the power, like in France and Germany, to reverse course. But we are seeing also how some forces are working on banning the AfD and other, and Le Pen has already been banned from standing again as a contestant for the presidency in France, right? I mean, they're working on ironing this out internally.
well, this should all have been red flags which have made people to rise up. That is, as you said, when they went after Le Pen, when they began talking about banning AfD, even they did name it as an extremist party, which means that the intelligence service can go after its members. You have, when the Romanians voted the wrong way, the interference in Georgia, Moldova. I mean, there's been so many cases now where there should have been more of an uprising. I think that a lot of the problem is that the elected officials who say we just have to go and vote, but a lot of what the elected officials do now, they become almost bureaucrats. Their role is of implementing decision making. I mean, in this country, we're not even part of the European Union, but much like Switzerland, but you just get in the paper, okay, now they have implemented 150 EU directives. So that's the job of of democratically elected officials, implementing the directives from a political union which we're not even member of. So there's no political debates about it. There's no discussions. And at that point you have to ask, of course, it's not a dictatorship, but at that point you have to ask where exactly does the democracy come in? How do you oppose any of this? If something is being decided in Brussels and the political leaders, no matter who you voted for, will just implement these directives because they say it's by treaty or something else, then well, what actually can you do? And I think this is why the U.S. national security strategy, it's quite transparent that they see the EU as being the cancer to Europe, and they would like to see the EU broken up. Now, the U.S. isn't this altruistic power only caring about democracy. Of course, they have their own interest. If you break up the EU, there won't be this collective bargaining power. But also, I think the U.S. it would like to see Europe as a partner, because if they have a strong partner, they will strengthen their position in the world. But now they see the Europeans as they're weakening, of becoming increasingly a burden. So I think they want to split up the EU and return to nation states that actually seek to enhance their own national interests.
Yeah, although this is the point where I do need to ask, do you believe that is not just the White House, but that is the US strategy? Because I have this very conflicting issue here that on the one hand, yes, the NSS is kind of a watershed document that phrases everything different. On the other hand, the national security strategy is not legally binding. This is, a concept paper by a couple of people in the White House, really, probably fairly small circle, signed off by Donald Trump. On the other hand, Congress last week is about to pass, is working on passing the National Defense NDAA, National Defense Appropriation Act. No, Acquisitions Act, the act that's going to fund the the defense establishment in the US, and that establishes the legally binding premises upon which the US has to act. And in the NDAA, the Congress actually forbids troop reductions below 270,000 or so in Europe, and similar for Korea, and says any troop reductions below that level need to first need to be justified toward Congress, and Congress needs to sign off on it. And any unilateral withdrawal from the US cannot be done by President Trump. It would have to go through us. So Congress actually now enacted a very strong document ensuring the continuation of US presence in Europe. And at the same time, we have the NSS. So you could argue, okay, this is the two branches kind of quarreling with each other. On the other hand, you can take Brian Barletik's argument and say, like, no, look, this is just what it is. It's national security theater. It's continuity of agenda. Overall, the US is just putting more pressure on the Europeans to do their bidding. However, the Europeans seem to be seriously pissed, although I do not know whether they actually are, or whether in the back channel discussions that are going on, there's kind of an agreement. Well, let's play our part in the grand theater that this performance is.
Well, I don't think it's all theater, but I do agree with Barletik that this isn't this binary of the US abandoning empire for peace. It's simply the relationship with the Europeans changing. That is, if you look at just the strategic interest, then you would see the direction of the US, irrespective of who sits on the throne. If it's Trump or whoever, of course, they will come with their own minor or bigger differences, but the overall, the way I see it is the whole relationship of the political West after the Cold War. After World War II, the US, of course, was a very generous hegemon especially for the Europeans, because they needed their frontline states to be very prosperous and strong. So you wanted Western Germany, for example, to be stronger than Eastern Germany. So this was reflected in generous trade agreements. They looked after European security. They helped to rebuild. Again, these trade agreements are often overlooked, but they were quite good to the Europeans as well. Of course, it's opened up for US industries, technologies, and finance. But overall, it was a very generous United States. And after the Cold War, the US set up, global hegemon. It wanted key nodes in its empire. That is, countries which had regional partners. So if you have Japan in the east, Germany, the UK in the west, and if you read the book of Katzenstein, he has a very good way, the way he maps it out. But anyways, but now, of course, in a multipolar world where the EU doesn't really have a clear role anymore, it will begin to fragment. Its economic position in the world is weakening. Well, what do you do? Because is it going to be a powerful partner which will help you to have a greater say in the world, or will it drag you down? So if you're in the United States, you're thinking, well, we have to reduce some of the cost. It shouldn't be a burden to us, the Europeans. They should go from a burden to a benefit. So in other words, they should go out there and do our bidding. So the Ukraine war, let's hand it over to the Europeans. They can finance it. They can weaken Russia. So I don't see it as a pro-Russian policy. I just hand it over to the Europeans. Meanwhile, what should the economic relationship be like? They have the option. They can either make the EU an exclusive geo-economic bloc for the EU, which it kind of does. That is, don't trade with the Chinese, Russians, Iranians, cut down on India, like whoever rivals the United States. This should be our exclusive sphere. The Europeans are going along with this. Some are arguing perhaps we should just purge it a bit. That is, all these industries they have in Germany, for example, why they should come across to the United States. You see some of this as well. So it's just a relationship changing. The EU isn't, the Europeans aren't their main partner, either in balancing the Soviet Union or sustaining a collective hegemon in the post-Cold War era. In the multipolar world with a weakening Europe, the main role for the Americans is to stop spending so much on the Europeans and start to extract something from them. And that's the process we're going through. And I think Trump is merely a transitional guy. I mean, if the Democrats come to power, they're gonna soften this, but the overall direction, that's where we're going. Is why would they devote so much efforts to Europe, which is of declining relevance?
And they treat Europe with astonishing contempt.
Oh yes, no,
And until last week,
this
the
is coming
Europeans were
forward
begging
very
for
clearly. Yeah.
more. Well, okay, this discussion is to be continued. Glenn, people who want to follow you, they should go to your YouTube channel under your name, Glenn Diesen. They should follow you on Substack, as I do. They should follow you on Twitter, as I do. You're doing the absolutely most stellar work out there. Is there any place that I forgot where people should go?
No, it's well, primarily Twitter, my Substack, and yeah, YouTube channel.
Everybody, check out Glenn Diesen. Glenn, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Pascal.